You owe the Lakeview Board $4,200 for repeated unauthorized water use. That was the first thing Vanessa Crane said to me while standing beside my own dock, on my own land, watching water drip off my elbows like I had just robbed a bank instead of taken a morning swim. She held the violation notice between two manicured fingers, her sunglasses pushed up into that perfect sprayed blonde hair of hers, smiling like she'd been waiting all week to ruin somebody's life. And honestly, if I had not been so cold from the lake, I might have laughed right in her face. But I did not laugh. I just stood there, barefoot, on the wet cedar boards, looking at this woman in white linen pants and wedge sandals, her black Escalade idling behind her with exhaust curling over my gravel drive. And I remember thinking, lady, you have no idea whose dock you just stepped onto. My name is Caleb Mercer, and 8 months before that ridiculous morning, I had inherited a little piece of heaven from my great-aunt Evelyn, a lake house tucked inside a private neighborhood called Cedar Hollow Estates, just outside Bryan County, Oregon. Now, I know that sounds fancy, and in some ways it was, but to me, it was not about status or square footage or impressing anyone at dinner parties. It was 15 acres of spring-fed water behind a weathered cedar house with a green metal roof, a siding porch swing, and a dock that creaked like an old man every time the temperature changed. I moved there after my marriage ended, and not in some clean grown-up, shake hands and wish each other well kind of way. It ended the way bad weather ends a summer picnic. Sudden, utterly everybody soaked, nobody talking about the sandwiches anymore. I had spent almost a year living out of boxes and legal folders, sleeping badly, pretending I was fine because men in their 40s are apparently supposed to bleed quietly. Then Aunt Evelyn passed, and her lawyer called, and somehow this place became mine, every morning at 6, before the neighborhood sprinklers kicked on. Before people walked their dogs in matching fleece vests, I would walk down to the dock with coffee still burning my tongue, step into that cold lake, and swim straight out until the house looked small behind me. The water woke me up in a way nothing else could. It shot the sadness right out of my chest for a few minutes. It made me feel like my body still belonged to me. That sounds dramatic, I know. But if you've ever been through a divorce that stripped you down to the studs, you understand how a quiet place can feel less like property and more like rescue. Cedar Hollow itself was one of those neighborhoods real estate brochures describe with words like exclusive and serene, which usually means expensive and easily annoyed. There were 118 homes arranged around the lake and the surrounding woods, and 21 of us had direct water access. Most of the people were decent enough. There was Tom Alvarez, a retired firefighter who waved with 2 fingers from his porch every morning. There was Lila Cho, who used to run the public library downtown and knew every scandal in the county going back to 1976. There was the Whitaker family, whose twins fished off their paddleboard and always apologized to the fish before tossing them back. It could have been peaceful. It should have been peaceful. But Cedar Hollow had Vanessa Crane. Vanessa was the president of the Lakeview Board, which everyone still called the HOA, even though the documents used some fancier name that made it sound like a country club with bylaws. She had held the position for 5 years, and in those 5 years, she had turned herself into the unelected sheriff of mulch, mailboxes, and human breathing patterns. Vanessa was a luxury real estate broker, the kind who talked about property values the way priests talk about sin, and every decision she made somehow came back to one thing, keeping Cedar Hollow looking perfect enough to sell. Her husband owned a roofing company. Her brother ran a landscaping outfit. Her cousin, conveniently, handled community compliance consulting, which I later learned was just a polished way of saying he got paid to write scary letters on letterhead. But back then, all I knew was that Vanessa drove through the neighborhood twice a week in that giant Escalade, moving slowly past each house like a shark wearing Chanel perfume. If your trash cans stayed out 12 minutes too long, you got an email. If your shutters faded from forest green to slightly tired forest green, you got fined. If your kids parked on the curb during Thanksgiving, you got a warning about visual congestion, whatever that was supposed to mean. People joked about her at barbecues, but it was the nervous kind of joking people do when they know the wrong person might overhear. Aunt Evelyn had warned me about people like that. She had been one of the original residents when Cedar Hollow was built, back before the developer put up stone gates and started calling every patch of trees a lifestyle amenity. Evelyn was not rich in the way Vanessa respected. She wore men's flannel shirts, kept bees, rescued injured raccoons, and once sued the county over an illegal drainage permit because, as she told me when I was 12. Little kings are still kings if nobody stops them. She had served on the first neighborhood board, helped write the lake rules, and then, according to Lila, quit after telling everyone in the room they had the moral imagination of a wet napkin. So, when Vanessa stood there on my dock that morning, telling me I had violated Section 12.8, subsection C, by engaging in recurring recreational activity creating measurable community lake burden, I swear I felt Aunt Evelyn laughing somewhere in the trees. I asked Vanessa what community burden I had created by swimming alone at sunrise. She tapped the paper with one red fingernail and said, "Patterns matter, Mr. Mercer. Daily use over an extended period is no longer casual enjoyment. It becomes elevated use, and elevated use triggers assessment." I looked over my shoulder at the empty lake, glassy and pale under the morning fog, then back at her. "Vanessa, this is behind my house." She smiled wider, like I had walked right into her favorite trap. "The lake benefits the entire community, and the board has authority to regulate excessive private exploitation." That phrase stayed with me. Excessive private exploitation. I was wet, cold, emotionally bruised, and suddenly being accused of exploiting a lake by quietly floating in it before breakfast. I said, "And the $4,200? She lifted her chin. "Past impact fees, administrative penalties, and notice preparation. Payment is due in 30 days. After that, the board may pursue a lien." There was. The word people in HOA neighborhoods fear like thunder. Lien. Not a conversation, not mediation, not even a warning. A lien. On the house my aunt left me, on the one place in the world where I was starting to feel human again. I could feel heat rising in my face, but I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. That was something my work had taught me. Before I moved to Cedar Hollow, I had spent 14 years as an environmental land use attorney, mostly fighting cities, developers, and special districts that tried to stretch their authority until ordinary people snapped. I knew the smell of overreach. It smelled a lot like diesel exhaust and expensive perfume, so I took the paper from her, folded it once, and said, "You are right about one thing, Vanessa. Rules matter." Her smile flickered just a little. "I'm glad you understand." I looked past her at the lake, where the fog was lifting and the first sunlight was turning the water silver. "Oh, I understand more than you think." She did not like that. Her jaw tightened, but she recovered quickly, because people like Vanessa always do when they think the room still belongs to them. She stepped off my dock, the sandals clicking against the boards, and tossed one last sentence over her shoulder. "Do not make this harder than it has to be, Mr. Mercer." I watched her climb into the Escalade and drive away, tires crunching gravel, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust and the kind of anger that does not explode right away. It settles, it gets quiet, it starts organizing. That afternoon, the first email went out to all 118 homes. Subject Lime. Urgent notice regarding unauthorized lake activity. By dinner, my phone was buzzing with texts from neighbors I barely knew. By 9, someone had posted a blurry photo of me swimming on the community message board, complete with timestamps, red arrows, and the caption suggesting my private usage pattern could endanger property values. Vanessa had not just fined me. She had turned my healing into a neighborhood crime scene, and that was her first real mistake. Because while she was busy embarrassing me in public, I was sitting at my kitchen table with Aunt Evelyn's old reading glasses, opening the county records database and finding something very strange. For 5 years, every homeowner in Cedar Hollow had been charged $90 a month for professional pool system maintenance. The problem was, Cedar Hollow did not have a pool. Now, I want you to understand something about rich neighborhoods with committees. They will argue for 3 hours about the color of a mailbox, but they assume nobody is ever going to read the budget. That is where Vanessa made her second mistake. I did read the budget. I read every line of it. Sitting at Aunt Evelyn's kitchen table while the refrigerator hummed and the lake outside turned black under the moon. And the longer I looked, the more that $90 pool maintenance charge started blinking at me like a warning light. $90 per household, every month, from 118 homes, for something that did not exist. No pool, no pumps, no filters, no chlorine shit. Just a natural spring-fed lake that had been doing its job since long before Vanessa discovered waterproof mascara. So the next morning, I drove into Bryan County and spent 4 hours at the records office with a clerk named Denise, who looked like she had seen every kind of human stupidity and was no longer impressed by any of it. She slid old binders across the counter, one after another. and by lunch I had copies of the original Cedar Hollow covenances, the first lake management agreement, several board minutes, and enough financial filings to make Vanessa's perfect hair start smoking. The early documents were simple. Residents could swim, fish, paddle, and maintain private docks as long as they did not damage the shoreline or block access. There was nothing about ever recreational burden, nothing about impact penalties for morning swims, and absolutely nothing that gave the board the power to charge one homeowner $4,200 for using water behind his own house. But starting 5 years earlier, right around the time Vanessa became president, mysterious amendments began appearing in the rules. They were worded like they had been written by a lawyer who hated sunlight: expanded enforcement authority, emergency environmental assessments, special use classifications. The problem was, none of them had the resident vote required by the original covenanters. They were just there, like weeds in a garden nobody had checked for a while. Then I found the invoices. The pool maintenance payments went to Crane Property Services, which happened to be owned by Vanessa's husband, Russell. The lake vegetation work went to Northwest Emerald Landscaping, run by her brother. Compliance consulting went to a firm registered to her cousin in Portland. It was not an HOA anymore. It was a family vending machine with stone gates. And for a minute, I just sat in my truck outside the county building with the papers stacked on the passenger seat, feeling that strange mix of anger and clarity that comes when you realize the bully is not powerful, just careless. I could have gone straight to court. Honestly, part of me wanted to. I wanted to drag every invoice into a courtroom and watch Vanessa explain how a non-existent pool needed $10,000 a month in maintenance. But Aunt Evelyn had always said public truth hits harder than private revenge, so I waited for the next board meeting. It was held in the clubhouse, a cedar and glass building that smelled like lemon cleaner, carpet glue, and fear. About 50 residents showed up because Vanessa had made sure my name was on the agenda. And people love a scandal as long as they can pretend they are concerned about community standards. She sat at the front table in a cream blazer, with Russell beside her pretending to read notes, her cousin Grant in a navy suit, and 2 board members who looked like they had been regretting their life choices since breakfast. Vanessa opened with that bright, real smile and said, "Before we discuss Mr. Mercer's repeated violations, the board needs to approve an emergency shoreline preservation assessment of $600 per household." The room groaned. Someone whispered, "Again?" And Tom Alvarez leaned back in his chair like he was about to watch a stove catch fire. Lilith Shaw raised her hand, tiny and silver-haired and dangerous, in the way librarians are dangerous, and asked, "What exactly is the emergency?" Vanessa gave her a soft little pity smile. "Lila, these matters involve technical ecological concerns." That was when I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough for the room to turn. I had a folder in one hand, and maybe I enjoyed the moment more than I should have. "I have a technical concern," I said. "Why have we paid Crane Property Services for professional pool system maintenance for 5 years when Cedar Hollow does not have a pool?" You could feel the air leave the room. It was almost beautiful. Vanessa blinked once, then twice, then recovered with the kind of smile people use when they are stepping over broken glass barefoot. "That line item covers broader water amenities. Then why does the invoice say pool filtration inspection, chemical balancing, and pump servicing?" I held up the paper. "And why is the company receiving the money owned by your husband?" Russell's face went red so quickly I thought he might need medical attention. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Mr. Mercer, this is not the forum for baseless accusations." "Great," I said. "Then let's make it the forum for documents." I passed copies down the first row, and within 30 seconds the papers were moving hand to hand, neighbors leaning over each other, reading numbers they had been paying without question for years. Tom gave one low whistle. Lila muttered something that sounded like, "I knew it," and one of the younger mums in the back asked, "Are you telling me we paid for a fake pool while my kid's playground fund got denied?" That was the first crack. Vanessa tried to adjourn the meeting, banging the little brass bell they used instead of a gavel, but people kept talking over her. Questions came from everywhere. Why did her brother get the landscaping contract without bids? Why had the rules changed without a vote? Why was I being fined for lake use when the original covenanters allowed it? Vanessa's face hardened, and for one second I saw the real her underneath the polish. Not scared exactly, but furious that people she considered manageable had started thinking for themselves. She leaned toward the microphone and said, "This meeting is adjourned due to hostile conduct." Then she stood, gathered her papers, and walked out while the room erupted behind her. I thought that would buy me a few days. It bought me 18 hours. The next afternoon, I found a certified letter taped to my front door, which felt unnecessarily theatrical but very Vanessa. The board had increased my fine to $7,000, added legal review fees, and accused me of defamation, harassment, unauthorized document distribution, dock safety violations, and, my personal favorite, disruption of migratory bird patterns due to excessive splashing. I read that last one 3 times. Excessive splashing. Somewhere a duck had apparently retained counsel. That night, Leela Cho came by my house carrying a shoebox, a thermos of tea, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting years to ruin someone's evening. She sat at Aunt Evelyn's kitchen table, patted the wood like she was greeting an old friend, and said, "Your aunt told me this day would come." Then she opened the shoebox. Inside were letters, old photographs, handwritten minutes from the first resident meetings, and a sealed envelope with my name on it in Aunt Evelyn's slanted handwriting. I do not know how to explain what it feels like to see the handwriting of someone you miss when you are already tired and angry. It knocked the breath out of me. The letter began, "Caleb, if you are reading this, somebody has mistaken stewardship for ownership." That was Evelyn. Even from the grave, she could make you feel underdressed for the conversation. The documents in that box changed everything. The lake was not owned by the HOA. It was not owned by the board. It was not even owned collectively by the residents in the way everyone assumed. The water, the bed beneath it, and 50 feet of protected shoreline were held by the Elder Spring Conservancy, a private conservation trust created before Cedar Hollow was developed. Aunt Evelyn had been its founding trustee. The HOA had been allowed to help with basic upkeep under a limited management agreement, but only as long as it protected the ecology and served the residents fairly. The trust retained final authority over access, environmental fees, shoreline restoration, and any activity affecting the watershed. And when Evelyn died, trusteeship passed to me. I read that paragraph 4 times while Lila watched me over the rim of her tea. "So," I said slowly, "Vanessa has been charging people to manage property she does not control." Lila nodded. "Your aunt called it a mousetrap for arrogant people." I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because the whole thing was suddenly so much bigger than my stupid fine. Vanessa had built a kingdom on land that legally had a locked gate underneath it, and my aunt had left me the key. The next morning, I called Maren Holt, an environmental attorney I had worked with years earlier, a woman so calm in court that opposing counsel usually started sweating before she finished saying good morning. I sent her the trust documents, the fake invoices, the amendments, the violation letters, all of it. She called back 20 minutes later and said, "Caleb, this is not an HOA dispute. This is fraud with a water feature." By sunset, we had filed a formal complaint with the State HOA Oversight Office, requested an independent audit, notified the county prosecutor, and issued a trustee demand letter requiring the board to stop collecting unauthorized lake-related fees immediately. Vanessa responded the way cornered people respond when their whole identity depends on never being wrong. She did not slow down. She accelerated. She called an emergency meeting at 10 in the morning on a weekday, hoping most residents would be at work. She sent an email claiming I intended to privatize the lake and charge every household thousands of dollars. She told elderly residents they might lose access to the only walking paths they used. She told families I was trying to destroy Cedar Hollow out of bitterness from my divorce, which was such a personal, ugly little knife twist that, for a moment, I almost gave her the reaction she wanted. But then Tom Alvarez forwarded me a voicemail from Vanessa, her voice tight and sweet, saying, "People like Caleb come into established communities and try to rewrite history. People like Caleb." I sat there listening to that phrase, and something in me went still. This had never been just about rules. Vanessa hated that I had inherited what she wanted to control. She hated that Aunt Evelyn, a woman she could never charm or intimidate, had left the lake's future to someone outside her circle. She hated that I could read the documents and understand them. By Friday, she had filed for a temporary restraining order, claiming my legal requests and public questions were harassment. She wanted me banned from board meetings, banned from contacting residents, and, unbelievably, banned from entering the lake until the matter was resolved. The hearing was set for Monday. Maren read the petition and actually laughed, which was the first time I felt truly safe all week. "She just gave us a courtroom," she said. "Let's use it." Monday morning, the courthouse smelled like old coffee and floor wax. Vanessa arrived in a navy dress, flanked by Russell, Grant, and the local news reporter she had pleasantly invited to watch her victory lap, but victory did not show up for her. The judge read the petition, looked at the documents Marin submitted, looked back at Vanessa, and said very slowly, "Requesting financial records is not harassment. Questioning board authority is not intimidation. Swimming in a lake is not a threat." The restraining order was denied with prejudice. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa made her third and most fatal mistake. She saw the reporter's camera, stepped toward it, and instead of saying no comment like any reasonable person with a collapsing fraud scheme, she smiled that glassy smile and said, "This community is under attack by outsiders who do not respect what we built." By that evening, half the county had seen the clip. By midnight, residents who had stayed quiet for years were calling me, texting me, sending me violation letters, invoices, photos, recordings, everything. Vanessa had tried to isolate me. Instead, she had introduced everyone to the idea that they were not alone. And right there, while my phone kept buzzing on Aunt Evelyn's kitchen table, Marin sent one final message that made the room feel suddenly very quiet. The forensic accountant found duplicate invoices, same invoice numbers, different amounts. "Caleb, this is criminal." The next 24 hours felt less like a neighborhood dispute and more like watching a house collapse in slow motion while the owner kept insisting it was just settling. The forensic accountant found duplicate invoices, then altered invoices, then invoices for equipment that had never existed. And by Tuesday afternoon, Marin was on the phone with the county prosecutor, while I stood on Aunt Evelyn's back porch staring at the lake, trying to understand how my quiet morning swims had opened a trapdoor under half the neighborhood. Vanessa, of course, did not take this like a person with healthy coping skills. She sent out a frantic email claiming I had fabricated the documents because I wanted revenge on successful women. She called Tom Alvarez a disgruntled pensioner. She told Lila Cho she was confused and should not involve herself in complicated financial matters, which was possibly the dumbest thing anyone had ever said to a retired librarian with receipts. Then, around 3 in the morning, my motion lights came on. I watched through my upstairs window as a figure in a hooded raincoat stepped onto my gravel drive and swung something hard into my mailbox. Once, twice. Then came the long metallic scream of a key dragging across the side of my truck. I stood there with my phone recording, heart pounding, not because I was scared exactly, but because there is something deeply unsettling about seeing how small a powerful person becomes when they think nobody is watching. The hood slipped back under the porch light. Vanessa. She looked wild. Mascara under her eyes, hair flattened by rain, jaw clenched so tight it changed the shape of her face. She smashed one of the visible cameras with a garden stake, then actually paused to look around like she had done something clever. What she did not know was that after her first threat, Tom had helped me install 2 backup cameras in the eaves. By breakfast, the sheriff's department had the footage. By lunch, Vanessa had a vandalism complaint, a witness intimidation complaint, and a very bad afternoon ahead of her. That should have been enough to make her stop. But panic does not make people smarter, it just makes them louder. The next morning, Russell showed up at my door wearing a suit that fit him too well for a man doing something so poorly. He handed me an envelope and said, "Vanessa wants peace." Inside was a cashier's check for $75,000 and a settlement agreement that would have required me to withdraw every complaint except the original fine and never speak about Cedar Hollow finances again. I looked at the check, then at Russell, and said, "You understand prosecutors do not honor neighborhood hush money, right?" His face twitched. "You need to think about how complicated this could get for your family." That was when I felt the last bit of mercy in me go quiet. I stepped closer and said very calmly, "Russell, if you came here to threaten me, blink twice so the camera gets a good angle." He left without the check. 2 days later, the story broke countywide. Not because I leaked it, but because Vanessa tried to burn the clubhouse records shed at 6 in the evening like a cartoon criminal who had never heard of cloud storage. The fire department put it out before the main building caught that the investigator found accelerant, and Marin had already digitized everything anyway. By then, residents were no longer whispering. They were angry in daylight. People who had been fined for porch lights, flower colors, birthday parking, loose Christmas garland, and one apparently offensive bird bath started sending their stories to the prosecutor. And once one person spoke, the shame moved to the right place, not on the people who had been bullied, but on the woman who had built a business out of making them feel alone. Vanessa was arrested at the regional airport 3 mornings later with 2 suitcases, a one-way ticket to Belize, and more than $600,000 in cashier's checks and bearer bonds. Russell folded first. Her brother folded after that. Grant, the cousin with the compliance letters, suddenly discovered a deep moral commitment to cooperating with investigators. By the end of the week, the board's little empire had turned into a criminal fraud case with words like embezzlement, conspiracy, and attempted witness intimidation attached to it. But the moment I remember most was not the arrest. It was the meeting that happened that Saturday. Because the clubhouse smelled like smoke and nobody wanted to sit under fluorescent lights pretending everything was normal, so we held it outside, on the shoreline. With folding chairs in the grass and people standing along the dock, the lake was calm that evening. That perfect blue-gray color it gets right before sunset. And for the first time since I had moved in, the neighborhood felt like a place instead of a performance. Lila opened the meeting with Aunt Evelyn's old bell, the one she had used years ago when the original residents argued about preserving the shoreline. Tom stood beside me with his arms crossed like a bodyguard I had not asked for, and Maren placed the trust documents on a folding table where everyone could see them. When it was my turn to speak, I thought I would feel triumphant. I did not. I felt tired. I felt grateful. I felt the weight of every family looking at me, wondering if I was about to become a nicer version of the same problem. So I told them the truth. The lake was never controlled by the board. The Alder Spring Conservancy held the water and protected shoreline, and Aunt Evelyn had passed trusteeship to me. Legally, I could suspend access. I could charge market-rate conservation fees. I could demand back payments for unauthorized management and probably win. The silence after that was heavy enough to bend the grass. I saw fear on faces that had already had enough fear for one lifetime. Then I pulled out the proposal Maren and I had written. $200 per household per year. Not per month, per year, for real water testing, native shoreline restoration, and a public annual report every resident could read without needing a law degree. Families who could not pay could volunteer on conservation days. Every contract would require open bids. Every dollar would be published, and properties creating unusual environmental impact would pay mitigation fees based on actual assessment, which meant Vanessa's oversized lakefront lot, with its chemical lawn, drainage runoff, and concrete terraces, would owe $5,600 a year if she ever came back to it. Nobody cheered at first. They just absorbed it. Then Lila started clapping, slow and sharp, and Tom joined her. And then the whole shoreline rose into this messy, relieved, human kind of applause that sounded nothing like victory and everything like exhaling. 6 months later, Cedar Hollow is not perfect, because communities are made of people and people are complicated, but it is honest in a way it was not before. The lakefront is public. The shoreline is healing. The twins still apologize to Fish. Leela runs the records committee with terrifying efficiency. Vanessa took a plea deal and will spend real time in prison. Russell lost his contracts, and Ground is no longer allowed to scare retirees with fake legal language. As for me, I still swim every morning. The water is still cold enough to steal my breath. And sometimes, when the fog lifts off the surface, I think about Aunt Evelyn and how she knew power would eventually come knocking in good shoes with bad intentions. I also think about the part people argue with me about. Some neighbors say I should have charged every household back fees and rebuilt the trust with a war chest. Others say even charging Vanessa extra was petty, that justice should not come with a wink. Maybe they are right. Maybe mercy and accountability always look messy when they sit at the same table. But I know this much. Vanessa tried to make my lake smaller than her ego, and in the end, the lake made all of us bigger than our fear. So tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have forgiven the community, charged everyone what they owed, or made Vanessa pay until the last dollar was gone? Drop your take in the comments, especially if you have ever dealt with an HOA, a neighborhood board, or one tiny tyrant with a clipboard and too much free time. And if you believe ordinary people can still beat corrupt systems when they keep the receipts, hit subscribe, because trust me, Cedar Hollow was not the only place where the rules were written by someone who never expected anyone to read them.